Good afternoon. My name is Dwayne Lawson Brown. I'm the Community Engagement Specialist with the DC Commission on the Arts and Humanities, and it is my pleasure to welcome you to the first Business of the Arts session of 2026. Happy New Year! We are overjoyed to be bringing this presentation to you because public art and this particular grant, the Public Art Building Communities Grant, is one that has had some mystery behind it and has had some incredible outcomes. And so we want to provide an opportunity for folks to learn more about this particular grant and all of the factors that go into this grant. And we are joined today by my colleague who runs and manages the program for the Public Art Building Communities Grant, Carrie Kennedy. So before we get started, I do want to let you know that we have the Q&A box that will be active for this grant for this presentation. So if you go to the More section below the presentation, you should see Q&A within that More menu. If you have questions, please place your questions into the Q&A. If you place them in chat, I'll also do my best to keep up. Um, and we will be answering questions at the end of the session. So, with no further ado, please welcome Carrie Kennedy.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for that introduction, Dwayne. That was great. Um, this workshop was to focus on the public art building communities application for folks who are new to public art or just want to make sure they're getting started in a way that will set them up for success. This is a dense and complex application, but it serves to protect your vision, and it's kind of like a prep school for public art projects in general. So I'm going to start the presentation and we'll get started. Thank you. So FY27, Business of the Arts, Head Start. The application period, we're still working on it, and it's going to run through March through July 2026, and it will close at 9 p.m., which is its usual time frame. This grant, the Public Art Building Communities Grant, supports individual artists and organizations in an effort to design, fabricate, and install new temporary or permanent works of public art that connect artists in their artwork with communities. Of course, there will be multiple awards in varying amounts. Individuals request up to $75,000, organizations up to $125,000, and business improvement districts request up to $150,000. This grant application process is competitive and subject to the availability of funds, and the staff contact is Carrie Kennedy at dc.gov, and that's standard. The program goals. By making this project a grant award, CAH endeavors to encourage the creation and installation of original high-quality public artworks within the District of Columbia, develop meaningful opportunities to connect artists to communities, provide exposure and participation to the community in the public art making process, further learning or discovering opportunities that may be present through public art installations, support the creation of public art by DC resident artists, promote robust and diverse artistic expression that resonate with residents of the district, and contribute to the District of Columbia's public art collection in the built environment. Some of you who have been to our workshops before have heard this. You definitely see it. And I want to give a tip here. When you're writing your narrative, see if you look at the program goals and can tie them into your narrative, how your project will support these goals. You'd be surprised how many grant applications don't use this kind of structure where they can build their narrative around. So it's just a suggestion. And it also, again, helps to make sure that folks who rank the applications can see where your project is going to meet the goals. Just a point, staff, we don't select the work. We have panelists who are comprised of architects, landscape architects, artists, former public art grantees, arts administrators, and arts education folk who help with some of the programming. So again, if you're familiar with the program, we have different types of artwork throughout the city. We have Dancer here with Logan Circle, Victor Ekpuk, the artist. And we have Neighbors and Friends, Mazi Mustafa, Kate DeCiccio, FY20, an individual permanent work. Here's a tip. Read the full RFA and make sure this grant is for you. Because you don't want to work on this grant and realize that your project is ineligible. And that happens more times than you would think. Public art requires project management and administrative management skills. So if you don't have those skill sets, or if you are not comfortable with those skill sets, you have an opportunity to build a team that will help cover these things. It's a challenging commitment to do the application, and then public art itself is a challenging commitment. Public art projects are always political. They're always delays. They're always something that is the next step that you have to overcome. So again, you want to make sure this is the grant you're looking for. It can take months to complete most large-scale public art projects. They can take 1 to 3 years. But as a granting agency with the city, grants are allotted a year to complete, and that's because of some of the way the money is encumbered and it must be spent in that year. So the reason the proposal is required to be so thorough is so that you can take part of that timeline, that 2 to 3 years that would actually take to get that project up and running. You're creating the proposal, which will take up it's almost like a year of planning that you're doing in this truncated timeline. And that will allow you to start and complete your actual project, your grant, within the fiscal year. This grant program is not for interior work. Again, read that RFA. Folks will submit work, have done the application, and then they're asking for funding for interior work. This grant is exterior for new work and must be free for the public to access it. Other grant programs that may be a better fit, it depends. There's Art Bank, there are art exhibition grants, there are arts and humanities education project grant programs, the capital projects, Color the Curve, Civic Commission projects, East Art Grant Program, field trip experiences, general operating support, which for organizations might be a great grant to look at. Liftoff Grant Program, PEF, projects, events, or festivals, another great grant application for organizations. And Fresh Paint, which is actually currently open, and it's a great stepping stone to build your public art portfolio. Your eligibility requirements. You must be an experienced artist or arts-related professionals over the age of 18. Documented proof of DC residency 1 year before you apply for the application. You must obtain and be able to obtain a citywide clean hands, and you must be in good standing with CAH, which just goes back to if you've ever been awarded, you need to have done your final report to be in good standing with CAH. For organizations, you must be incorporated as a nonprofit 501c3 or 501c6, or be recognized as a District of Columbia Business Improvement District, a BID. Tip for our individual artists who are looking to partner with an organization, this is one of the first conversations you need to have, and make sure that they are incorporated as a nonprofit, that they're registered with and authorized to do business in DC, that they have a principal business address, that it's located in DC, For your organizations, you have to ensure that 51% of your activities occur in DC, have an active board of directors, demonstrate a partnership with a visual artist to design, fabricate, and install and deinstall, if temporary, the proposed application work of art in a public space. Obtain certification of city-wide clean hands and be in good standing. So again, make sure your organization, for organizations and artists, meet all of these requirements. I've had people apply, and I actually had a gentleman apply at second time with an organization and had to midway switch because the second time he applied, the organization was not eligible for clean hands. If an organization has never applied for clean hands before, and a lot of nonprofits don't pay taxes, they think that they will be able to get a clean hands. You can't. It takes 2 to 6 weeks. And if you haven't started earlier in your timeline, this could be the one document or the one point that will hold up your grant. So again, January is a great time to start thinking about the things that will make sure you're eligible and help you start looking for a partner. Applicant restrictions. You can only apply for one PABC application per fiscal year. So artists may not apply as an individual as well as part of an organization's application as the lead or supporting artist. Who also may not apply? Individuals and organizations that require fiscal agents. Entities such as for-profit organizations, private foundations, political organizations, colleges or universities, foreign governments, federal government entities, and other District of Columbia government agencies, including DC public schools and charter schools. Again, these organizations are not eligible and have different places to find funding. So again, the district does not fund these type of organizations. So again, why is the PABC grant application so complex? So this is kind of a best practice definition of public art, and it's any artwork in a public space accessible to everyone that reflects community values, enhances environments, and fosters dialogue, ranging from permanent sculptures and murals to temporary installations, functional objects like artistic benches and digital displays, created through a public process with community input. I can't reiterate enough. Created through a public process with community input. It serves to transform landscapes, express collective identity, and engage people with their surroundings, often differing from museum art by its broad accessibility and direct community connection. And some sources, like the Association for Public Art and Americans for the Arts, are resources that you can go online. And Americans for the Arts has great archives, and articles about public art. A lot of artists who are transitioning from doing studio work have a really hard time with the created through a public process with community input. A lot of times folks will say, I have this great idea. I want to put this mural, and they've got it all sketched out. They know what they want to paint, and they show it to the community, and they think that that will qualify their project as a public art project. It might, but it might not make your application as competitive as it could be with community input. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. But this is, again, is why public art is so complex, this application too. So you want to take this concept, this idea, strain it through your great idea, and then have a project that, as stewards at CAH of taxpayer funded dollars, make sure that your project will rank and make people feel comfortable that taxpayers' dollars are being well spent. Then the politics of public art. There are always politics with public art. It can be infighting in your community, community organizations. It can, because we are the nation's capital, it can be on a federal level. There requires a great deal of paperwork with public art projects. Even if you weren't applying for this grant, you would still be writing officials, writing staff, writing different people in the community to get your project accomplished, to finish your project. You're going to need ANC support. So again, you have to be able to communicate with your A and C. There are city and federal laws that affect public art projects. And again, because we're the district, we're under city and federal laws. Your project needs to fit in with the needs of the city. It needs to fit in with the needs of your community. Communication. A lot of arts organizations think if they pick an artist, they've done their work. That's not the case. With public art, you're going to be in constant communication. Things will come up, things will be needed to be retweaked. You'll need better explanations. You may need to pivot. So, if again, communication is not your thing, you need to find somebody on your team that is going to take on the ability to communicate the needs and goals of this project. You have this 1 year time limit, and that is the one thing unique with this grant application that does, again, make it that much more complex. That means you have to have a couple of balls in the air. You may need to go to one approval committee while you're waiting on another approval committee. Logistics. Again, public art is basically always a juggling situation. You always have something that's going on. You're always needing to make plans, make backup plans, and also delays. That's a normal part of public art. But if you have this great proposal at the beginning, you can accommodate delays. I've rarely seen a public art project that did not have some type of delay. It can come from maybe we've had situations where the city Pepco is doing some rewiring on a wall that a organization wanted to use, switch in bus schedules depending on the project. I mean, it could be anything. The weather, it could be a little political thing that you kind of have to wait to blow over and then move forward once anything comes of that. So again, that's why this application is complex because it's going to protect your vision. It's going to make sure that your project has the tools and has the different things you need to make sure that if somebody asks a question about the project, we can go back as staff and say, this project is wanted in the community. It supports the goals of the city. And, we can go just down the line and support and make sure that your project comes to fruition. So another way you want to look at the narrative in the grant application, support your project with the 4 categories by which your project will be ranked. So 25% of the ranking score of your project is going to be under artistic content and capability. You want to make sure that the proposed artwork and work samples demonstrate high standards of artistic excellence, quality workmanship, innovation, and creativity within the chosen disciplines. You want to make sure the proposed artwork takes into consideration the dynamics of the site and provides an aesthetic quality through innovation and thoughtful design as demonstrated through a scale model depiction of the proposed artwork at the site. So again, your proposal and how you show that work, the panel looks at that as much as the narrative. They're really looking at the aesthetics, and they're looking at the aesthetics of the design pieces you show as part of your proposal. Applicant has experience with the site-specific public art projects and uses personnel with demonstrated arts experience, such as arts administrators, professional installation artists, to plan and implement artistic content. Again, we don't expect one person or one thing to be able to do maybe all of the parts of your project, but you need to be able to show that expertise is on your team. You also want to make sure your project materials and installation techniques are of industry standard and use materials that are sustainable and require minimal maintenance. The next thing you want to look at that category is capacity, budget, and sustainability. Again, 25% of your score. Proposed project goals and production and installation schedules are feasible. Again, the people who are on our panels and rank the applications have a very good idea of how long it takes to do something. So you want to make sure you've had someone who has that project management experience or that installation fabrication experience, that they're giving you timelines that make sense. Because what your proposal is also doing is making sure that the panel feels comfortable that you can complete this project. The applicant is equipped with expertise in art making and managing a public art project. Materials demonstrate a capacity to successfully manage the workflow and funds with financial monitoring systems in place. This goes back to how you're going to track the funds that you're using for your project. The applicant's budget information is detailed, feasible, and relevant to the project's overall scope and implementation. Organizations must demonstrate the ability to manage the implementation of a project and a commitment by its board of directors to support the proposed project. And then there's community engagement and impact, 25% of your score. Applicant demonstrates intentional engagement with the community where the project will be cited that reflects the community and enhances the proposed site. Applicant demonstrates sensitivity to the cultural, ethnic, and economic background of the neighborhood where the project will be installed. Applicant demonstrates how the meaning, content, and themes of the artwork impacts the intended audience with consideration of culture, age, physical ability, spoken languages, languages spoken, or environment. And finally, opportunity and equity, 25%. The project provides shared learning opportunities that facilitate a greater participation in public art, represents the community, and aims to promote a welcoming and inclusive environment. Proposed work and its ancillary programming is intentional in planning and implementation and has potential to engage a diverse audience based on culture, age, physical ability, and/or languages spoken. The project's location and the presentations that you may do with your project are accessible. And the project demonstrates potential to do one or more of the following: either broaden missions reached to communities and neighborhoods less served through public art, or support projects by individual artists and artists new to the public art field. Again, you may not have all of these things in your project, but the things that your project, the goals or the rankings or the categories that your project does have, you want to make sure you're writing that in the narrative. And again, I tell people this, I say this in the live chat all the time. People will tell me, well, our project was going to do this, it was going to do this, and it was going to do this. And I have to tell them, I said, I read your application and that was not stated. So even if you think, folks, this project is so well known, people know about it, or they, the subject matter is so well known, this person is so well known, you have to articulate it to the panel. As staff, again, we don't select. I can only share information that you put into the application. So if I'm asked a question, I'm basically making sure, and I have a knowledge of your application of what was said, and I go back and tell the panel if they have questions. Two things. You really don't want the panel asking questions, because if they start to ask questions, it starts to create kind of less confidence in your project. So you really want to make sure you've written everything that you feel your project is going to be able to do. Make sure the panelists have it. And again, if it's not in that application, I can't tell them. So again, it's just, again, look at this as a framework by how you want to write up your narrative. And again, the narrative section is going to have a limit, but again, have somebody else read your application and make sure, have them read it, and then explain to you what you think the project is going to do. That will get you closer to making sure your project is communicated the way you want. And again, these are basic grant writing tips. I say them all the time, but you'd be surprised how many applications don't reflect these basic grant writing tips. So I'm going to pull us out of public art for a second, because I was doing some research on the internet and I came across one of our former and current grantees, their master plan for their community. And one of the things that they had decided to do was get an idea of what the community's priorities and guiding values were. Now, this was not in their application, but I wanted to use it to show you how they took the input from the community and it's reflected in a public art project that they did. So as part of the community input process, we identified the fundamental values and priorities to anchor the plan. These grew out of community conversations, interviews, and an online survey. The community's response is reflected in the charts to the right. So They wanted, the community wanted projects that supported local artists and creators. They wanted to create pockets of beauty and joy, reinforcing the neighborhood's distinct identity, honoring people and events in our history, strengthening community and education, reckoning with and working toward the healing of past injustice, building understanding and empathy across differences, inspiring people to explore their own creativity, creating venues of community stories, generating dialogue, gathering community input. So these, they also have a scale. This was not in the grant application, but I found it interesting when I found it on the web because this was the project that came from some of this support. Again, every project cannot do all things. We don't expect that. But they captured what the project did do in their narratives, and they created a project that would definitely make something go. So this was under the 4th Street Underpass Art Portal, Gallery of the Southwest, celebrating the past, present, and future artwork. So they supported local artists by selecting 11 artists for these 12 murals that are in this underpass. They created a pocket of beauty and joy. They were reinforcing the neighborhood's distinct identity by identifying people who actually lived in the community, honoring people and events in our history, strengthening community and education, building understanding and empathy across cultures, which art has the ability to do, inspiring people to explore their own creativity, creating venues for community stories, generating dialogue, and gathering community input. So again, where your project hits the things in the grant application that we asked for, make sure you're articulating that. And again, if you're doing the work, then it's going to come out and through your project. So again, you want to make sure, I'm going to switch over now to the application because this was a part of their proposal. And this is what you're competing with. Again, people submit images. The better your images of this proposal, the better understanding and the more comfort people will have with your project. So this is a series of images that showed all of the murals that they were proposing in situ, which just means on site in this underpass, what it would look like. Then this is another mock-up from their proposal. They show you another view or another way of experiencing the space. This is a night view. They also had a daytime view. And again, they also included each mural that was proposed by each artist that was going to be in the proposal. More works. And again, when you're making your application, this is the level of detail that the panel is looking for. These images are also actual on-site. So these were the final on-site. So as you can see, they are very close to what was proposed. And that's another thing. They definitely want to make sure, and by showing the artist's work, showing such a good proposal that, and we asked for different site views of the work, day, night, all that. Folks, you'd be surprised what folks submit, but other folks are submitting what's required and asking from the grant. This is another on-site work. So again, you want to make sure you're explaining your project and showing that the final product is going to be what is finally executed. This is another artist. This is some of his prior work. So one of the sections in the application, we asked for prior work. So this artist actually, and I wanted to show this artist because he's interesting. He's showing handwritten work, how he starts his process, and then he does digital software where he shows scale, shows the actual measurements. And this is him showing, again, with a digital software, but then this is old school. If you look at the next two images, so for his day-night images, obviously they just use some type of filter on, looks like Adobe. It could even have been, and it looks like it was cut regular cut and paste And then take the filter off. You've got your daylight issue. And again, it looks like it's cut and paste. So again, if you don't have those type of skills, there are other ways you can get around and show your proposal, but you just have to give yourself the time. And that's why this is the Head Start in January. So again, these are different views of the work, showing how the work is going to fit into the landscape and different perspectives from how people are going to experience it from the car, how people are going to experience it as they walk by it. This is a work that was actually funded with the grant. Again, he's using the same thing as he showed with his previous work. He actually, though, gave more detail with how the individual wooden pieces would fit into the sculpture. He shows you how tall the sculpture is going to be, how wide it's going to be. Again, back to cutting and pasting those images. And this actually was FY24 Rain Garden, gourd, pineapple, and pearlette. And this was what Golden Triangle bid. And so this is again from the model, and there were 3 sculptures, so that's why you're looking at 3 images. And this is the actual image in sight. So again, it just goes back to you really have to think about how your work is being presented to the panel. So again, this is another artist showing previous work. And one of the things that artists tend to come into a bit of struggle with is how the work is presented, how their photographs look. The photograph of the work is almost as important as the work because the photograph shows your work in its best light. And so you have one previous work she has on the left, and on the right, it looks like it could be like a photographic issue, but it actually kind of highlights the quality of the work. So again, your images are very important, showing past work. This was the proposal, one of the proposal images, where you can see this was from micro to macro, rooted in space, and it was about science and women in science. And those were some of the, from community conversations, some of the things that they wanted to show on this particular mural. There was also across from the mural, a community garden was going to be put in. And so there was an extra community component where the community would be painting plywood templates to create the art on the fence. Now, I want to talk a little bit about, again, what the panel sees is what really should be the final project. If there are going to be any changes to your project, that has to go through staff for approval, because if it's too much of a change, then it would have to go back to panel. So we only small changes are made. And sometimes you just have to explain why things look the way they do. So she did make a couple of minor changes, just really one on the astronaut's uniform. She updated the uniform, but you still have all the elements and all of the concept of the original mural here. And the community actually painted the wooden figures. So they look a little different from the proposal, but you're still getting the majority, this is pretty much what was proposed. So we're going to talk a little bit about the mandatory documents in the application. There are quite a few, and they seem like they're a lot, but they basically come into 2 categories. They basically are looking at the fiscal health and your ability to do this project, and the ability to describe your project fully, either in writing and visually. So they boil down to, one, cannot owe the city money, and then you must be able to do business in the district. Again, this is why this is a head start. If you owe traffic tickets, it can be as simple as that. If you owe back taxes, it might be a little more complicated, but now you know. January, you're going to have to work on this if you plan on applying for this grant. And also the same thing with your proposal. Now is the time to think about your partners. Now is the time to think about how you're going to approach your project, how are you going to incorporate the community, and how are you going to make sure you have the pieces together. And should you wait till next year? If you're getting into your timeline and it doesn't look like, people are like, oh, we'll be ready next year. Think about that too, because again, you don't want to get so far into this application and you don't have all the pieces you need to be successful. So let's talk permit verification letters. This is every public art person's worst nightmare, every city administrator's worst nightmare. This is why you're asked to make sure that your work is permittable and that an engineer, if it's necessary, it's not always necessary, reviews your work so that your work can be sustainable and stay in place for decades. This actually happened in Brazil, but I just thought folks always think, oh, you're being too extra about making sure we have these permit verification letters. And, it's not a big deal. It's a big deal. So, for your permit verification letters, you do not have to get a permit for this application. You do have to get a permit verification letter. All applicants must submit a written permit verification letter to identify whether permits and approvals are needed to complete the project. And you need it from at least 3 of the following agencies and offices. If your project is in a DC park, you're going to need 4 letters. And the letters can say and will say, yes, you need a permit, or no, you do not need a permit. Please don't go down to an office and ask some random staff person, oh, well, I need a permit for this, because you will, and they may give you information that will tell you otherwise, because again, they don't deal with public art all the time. And in the RFA, again, read the RFA, we give you the contacts who work with public art, who will be able to review your proposal and let you know the things you need to do to get your application in. So those 4 organizations are the DC Department of Buildings, the DC Department of Transportation, the DC Office of Planning, Historical Preservation Office, and DC Parks and Rec. You will probably need a permit, at least one, and you definitely want to make sure you include that in your budget. So there's another reason why you need these permit verification letters. It gives you an idea of what permits you may need. This permit verification letter must be on their letter head. And so you need to be able to provide them the site location and address, plans and illustrations, narrative descriptions that explain exactly what is being proposed. You want to have enough information to make sure that they can let you know what permit may be permitted. And if you, again, the reason why you want to get started early is because if they look at your work and they say, oh, okay, we see this, but we need more information, you want to have time to be able to either get the information or make sure they have the information. So on the RFA, you want to make sure you plan early and contact the agencies. They ask for certain timelines to turn over. Of course, if the earlier you get your work in, probably the faster the turnover will be. Because as you get closer to the deadline, then they're looking at all the proposals that have come in towards the end. Applications without written permit verification letters will be deemed incomplete and considered ineligible. So again, you don't want to do all this work and not have a letter because somebody told you you didn't need one. You do. And again, yes, you will need a permit, or even no, you will not, and let the agency make the determination. So just really quickly, this is what the letter looks like. I'm CC'd on these letters usually. Sometimes the actual letter comes to me, but the email where you get the letter comes to you. So this was from the Historic Preservation Review, and they basically said the District of Columbia Historic Preservation Office was contacted by the grantee, the applicant for the above reference project or grant, This letter provides our comments regarding the grant in accordance with DC Historic Landmark and Historic District Protection Act of 1978 and Section 106 of the National Historic Preservation Act of 1966. So when I said there are all kinds of rules and regulations that have to be followed, the average person, I'm not always aware. Matter of fact, I'm often not aware, but the permitted agencies are. And so they're not saying no, they're simply letting you know what you'll have to do for your project. So for this project, based upon the information we have provided, we understand that the applicant proposes to paint the mural illustrated to the right on what appears to be an existing overgrown retention wall near the intersection. Although the wall where the mural is to be painted is adjacent to a historic district, we have no objection to the awarding of this grant, and we do not anticipate having any concerns if any aspect of the proposed project requires our review of a permit issued by the Department of Buildings, because that portion of the historic district consists primarily of empty lots that were supposed to be part of a scenic drive and never came to fruition. Therefore, the proposed mural will not diminish the integrity of the historic district. However, and then you always, most of the letters get this. However, if our review of the permit raises any historic preservation concerns, the project will be modified, may need to be notified to address those concerns. So again, they're just letting you know what the conditions will be for your project. This is kind of just an illustration. Historic preservation, again, this city is basically an artifact. Almost everywhere you look, buildings, the ground, hold artifacts. So historic preservation is a pretty important letter. And this is just an example of a historic building. If the project is permanent and you want to work on a historical building, there's a couple of things. It shouldn't do any damage to the building, and it shouldn't block the windows, especially if there's a historic building that is on the register or any particularly interesting building. It's going to raise concerns. You have to get the owner's permission also, and you really have to have a good relationship for them to maybe accept a project that is going to cover windows, especially if the building is in use. So again, it also makes folks wonder if you really considered the site. So this is just an example of how complicated that could be. Also, and this came up recently with a project, you really cannot do and shouldn't do damage to anywhere where you create a project, but definitely the brick in a historic building is considered a very integral component because sometimes these bricks are made of materials that are no longer available. And so if you damage the brickwork, it can't be repaired. So again, that's going to perk the ears and eyes of historic preservation. How the work is going to be secured to the building. Again, if you're blocking architectural elements, or it has the possibility of trying to hang a scaffolding to hold something on there, that is probably going to be a no. And we've actually had historic preservation say, no, this project, we don't recommend this project. That comes up in panel. Again, we have our architects and landscape architects, and they'll ask us, say, well, they'll say, what did historic preservation say? And then I get to read them the letter. So save yourself some time. Pick your site carefully and be mindful of the district's historic status. Permitting, again, this is another work. You'll need permitting for cranes if you need to incorporate them into your project. Cranes are only allowed on the district's streets on Saturdays, so that can affect your scheduling and timelines. So again, you really want to make sure and know what you will be getting into. A great tip, it's free. It's one of the best things you can use is Property Quest DC. Applicants are encouraged to visit Property Quest to obtain information about the location of their project. This website identifies whether the The address of your project is located within the historic district, affects a landmark, or is owned by the District of Columbia and or in public space. That's very important because again, there are spaces that are federally owned. So if that's another layer that you will have to address because again, you're going to have to get a letter from the owner stating that you can use their site. So you want to visit Property Quest, enter the address, and determine where the project is. And you still will have to do your regular steps with the grant. What's great about this is you get the address, you might get a little extra information, you find out and make sure what ward the project is in, you find your ANC. A lot of folks are like, well, where do I find my ANC? It's listed here. You can also put the address and the districts has a ward finder. I think it'll also give you this information, but Property Quest, like I said, is like a great one to use. It also gives you the owner. So at the bottom of this, it says owner, District of Columbia. So that is who you're going to have to get a letter from. Usually you probably get it from DDOT or possibly DOB to get that letter. So again, that's another reason to write your application. You can ask that question if this comes up, or it's one way of finding out who you would need to get a hold of. So, been talking about the mandatory application documents. If you're going to partner, or well, let me start with the artists. So for artists, you're going to need that ANC letter and your community outreach flyers. There have to be community outreach flyers. That's a part of the grant application. The proposed art and renderings, if necessary, architectural sketches, equipment estimates, the project budget, digital images of the proposed project site. Property Quest just provided one. So again, you want to think about that. It's not a great detailed one, but it can get you started. Resumes of key personnel involved in the project. Bios are unacceptable. Work samples, uh, image identification lists, your support materials, which again can be clippings, articles about previous works, site owner support letter, your permit verification letters. Again, emails are not acceptable. You have to have a letter on their letterhead. Your community support signatures is 25 to 75 signatures. Again, showing community support and that the community is being notified of the project. Contractor and service bids, artwork relationship and copyrights, a letter of intent to purchase equipment if you need to. From the DC Office of the City Administrator, compliance documents, a statement of certification, a certificate of clean hands, and IRS Form 9, W-9. For organizations, you're going to need lead artist work samples, an image identification list, artwork relationship and copyrights, warranty form, IRS letter of determination, DC tax certificate of incorporation, organizational chart, list of current board directors, letter of support from the board, current annual budget, previous fiscal year budget, current FY balance sheet, IRS Form 990, equal opportunity policy statements for budgets over $100,000 and organizations with budgets over that. So again, there is a checkoff list at the end of the RFA that lists each one of these things. If you're thinking of partnering with somebody, go through that list and make sure you all have or are working on getting all of the mandatory documents. Again, just showing different work when we talk about stewards of being good stewards of the project. This is Mythic Beings by Antone Williams with Nicholson Project and was a temporary project, but they had 4 different locations. So this project illustrates quite a few things. As you can see, we talk about architectural renderings or making sure that the work fits the character of the building. In MN, the Mythic Being of Self-Care, this was actually located on a historic building, the Lyric Theater on the backside, and historic brick. And so to accommodate that, when we talk about making sure your materials are safe for the building, they actually came up with a fabric material that was then pasted on the building with materials that would not hurt the brickwork. And then it's sealed with that paste. It was also, if you're familiar with that alleyway, it's also a graffiti gallery. And so as soon as this went up, literally, it went up on a Friday, and I think the Monday I went to check on it, it had graffiti on it. It had also, though, been prepped with a graffiti coating. So it was easy for them to go back and remove the graffiti that was placed on this work, not damaging the art and not damaging the building. So again, these are how these things, and these are the type of projects that your projects are competing with. These are the other projects that were in there. And again, all types of different buildings. This is a wooden, I believe, door. So again, this was used with the plaster and fabric material as the decal. The vinyl prints were used on buildings. And this building was empty. And as you see, it does cover a little bit of the door. But again, they had the owner's permission, not door, window, the owner's permission to go in and do that. So educational outreach. A lot of these projects, again, we're looking at the public art gives people a chance to interact with art in their community. So the educational outreach is a very important, and like I said, it's quarter of your score. There's community engagement, which includes connecting the people and organizations that live and work in the area where the public art will be installed. And it's a two-way communication. The goal is to show community awareness of the project and to provide the community with an opportunity to offer input. Again, you're not just taking them an image or an idea and saying, this is what I'm going to do. You want to see what the community has to say and what they want in their community. And I strongly recommend that. Again, folks, sometimes think, oh, I don't have to do that, or they don't want to do that. Projects you work with and the projects that will be ranked with your project, if they have that, they're going to have an advantage. So to gather this information, you want to consider how you want to reach out and get feedback about the project and how that project is going to reflect the values and backgrounds of community members. Community input. It's rooted in the idea that people should have a voice in their projects in their community. Again, in many communities, especially marginalized communities, projects often happen to people instead of for or with them. To activate and develop effective projects that serve the needs of stakeholders, it's important for artists and organizations to gather feedback about the public art project. Again, you want to show that in the narrative, how you gathered that feedback and how that feedback is incorporated into the public art project. Again, you can have surveys, meetings, interviews. Again, however you decide to gather that feedback, just make sure you let the panelists know. And then there's public art programming, which can help and support the activation of a public art project. This can engage community members and other stakeholders by creating meaningful opportunities to connect artists and projects within the community. It can provide exposure and participation to the community in the public art making process. So, and it can be from different disciplines. I'm not reading everything because I want to try to get this in so we have room for questions later. So this project found by Ira Titleman talks about engagement and input and programming. This project was based on climate change, and Ira met with a group of artists, talked about how they wanted to connect with their community and connect with people in the community, and they came up with a process. Ira came up with the process of creating temporary sculptures made from recycled materials, getting a reuse out of them. And so they had days where they met with the public and did workshops. The artists brought in recycled material, but the community was also invited to bring in collected, basically things that had passed their expiration date, recyclables, and just different materials. And they made sculptures out of them. And the sculptures were shown at Athelia Tanner Park on consecutive Saturdays. Swept Yard by Curry Hackett and Patrick McDonough were with Friends of Kingman Park Civic Association. When I say public art projects can take 2 or 3 years. This project took 10 years, and it started with the association reaching out to its community and getting feedback. They later wrote the grant. So it wasn't that the project took that long, but the process took that long. This project, again, incorporates a lot of different components. One of the things they wanted in this pocket park was to make it more usable. So they wanted seating where people could gather, maybe have an event, maybe have a performance. There's a pathway, again, that they got a landscape architect to work with them because it had gravel and it had concrete pieces and concrete strips. And in these small strips on the left, the light colored ones, there is information from community workshops, words and images created by panelists imprinted on this concrete. Also in the sign in Swept Yard, there's a QR code where the archives they did oral histories are held. So you can go take your phone and then listen to the people who were actually originally interviewed talking about this community. So again, we're looking at this level of community engagement. Again, we're not expecting everybody to do this, but this is what is a part of other projects. And then we have swimming with Monica Johan Bowles. She has workshops with her project where she actually, in the project where she has these fabric banners, she uses wooden imprints to imprint images on the actual work, and also has poetry workshops where people write poetry based on the theme. And this was a social justice theme on swimming, how water and swimming pools were not always accessible, like beaches can be segregated, pools were segregated. And so that was the theme of this work. And again, it's a social justice issue, and it's a public art process that continues a dialogue on that issue. So again, if you're an organization or individual artist and there's an issue you want to explore, that's definitely appropriate for the public art process. And again, I just wanted to show this. However you decide to show your project proposal, again, you can tell these are photographs with some type of filter, handwritten words, and she drew in or painted in the project. Again, because everybody has different skill sets when it comes to drawing and creating imagery. But again, you want to make sure you're showing a consistent scale and how things are going to be attached or where they're going to be attached and what it's going to look like on site. You know, this is what the site looks like from different vantage points. You want to make sure that that is what is shown in your proposal. So commemorative works, again, I'm going to stop reading so much of this because, again, it's in the RFA, but any project that's going to be in for over a year and is a commemorative statue, monument, sculpture, streetscape, or landscape, including a garden or grove, basically anywhere in the district, you're going to go and want to go in front of the DC Commemorative Works Committee. You can do that before you apply, you can do it after, but again, if you've got the time, do it before. It's one less thing that you're going to need to do. And the website is here, and you would go there, look for more information, get the staff contact, and begin that process. And again, just to remind folks, permanent projects legally for the purposes of this grant are more than 1 year without a deinstallation plan. And temporary projects up to 2 years and must include a deinstallation plan. It must be removed at the conclusion of the lifespan, and it's a part of your grant. And again, as I mentioned, all projects require minimal routine maintenance. That's why you're going to want to consult engineers on materials or vendors to see how your work is going to play in the life of your project. And it's a tip because, again, you want to include that information. You don't want the panel asking, you know, how long is this going to last? Is this going to last for 2 years? You'd be surprised, even for temporary projects, they get into the weeds about how this project is going to last for 2 years. Again, make sure your work is appropriate for outdoor spaces, consult the warranties, consult the engineers, remember safety elements, and that may require an extra engineering review. The elements, the Statue of Liberty I showed you in Brazil, again, wind is what knocked it down. So you really want to make sure you have that covered. And again, you're writing in the grant application how you plan on securing your work, and making sure there won't be an issue. And we expect that your work, especially if it's permanent, should be able to withstand the elements for decades. Uh, I'm going to read a few of these because, again, all of this is in your application. In your allowable costs, though, one of the big things is the artist fee can be up to 20% of the project budget. Um, if your artist needs the assistance, or if you as an artist feel like you could use some team members, again, you can pay for arts consultants. And then fabrication, if by the artist, is usually given a per hour fee. If you need to hire installation staff, that's also included. So I'm just, the things that are in the RFA, which is everything in this workshop, I'm going to go through quickly. Funding restrictions, again, read this carefully. Performance art projects, equipment purchases over $500, capital expenditures, you cannot subgrant or regrant, debt reduction, scholarships, awards. This grant is really just for an art project and the programming. With your budget, again, you want your artist fees, your artistic contractor personnel, insurance estimate, fabrication, installation, materials and supplies, marketing, advertising costs, event costs, transportation, equipment rentals, contractor bids, permits, copyright registration, plaque and dedication costs, photographic documentation, de-installation costs, temporary installations, and your contingency. Your contingency should be between 2 and 5%. And you need to think about how you're going to use it if you don't end up needing it for an emergency, because any money not spent will have to be returned at the end of the grant. Any project that costs more than the allowable grant request, the applicant must show their ability to fund the difference. So that, again, is a narrative question you want to make sure you explain very well and make sure you have that funding secured. Applications with more than one or separate unique project sites and different artists must have separate budgets and implementation schedules associated with each unique site. And again, the grant funds must be expended within the fiscal year 2027, which is October 1, 26 to September 30th, 2027. Again, I'm not going to go through all of this, but work samples and support materials. Again, the panel is looking at your work samples, your support materials, your resume of key personnel, and your general work sample suggestions from CAH staff. These contain significant weight because it's the clearest depiction of your best work. And again, they're using this proposal to understand how you're going to actually build this work. Your image identification list. All of the information is listed here. It's listed in the RFA to make sure that you're identifying slides. You don't want confusion. You don't want them thinking, oh, well, whose work is this? If you're partnering with an organization, make sure you document what's the organization support material and what's the artist support material. If there is a recurring or repeating theme from your public art project in your grant application, please discuss how the current request builds or innovates on the concept in your project description impact statement. So you want to explain why you're revisiting this process. And also in your project description, identify and discuss any use of artificial intelligence in your project. Again, your project has to go up in the real world. You want to make sure it can be built in the real world. And you need to also be up on the current laws with surveillance, with privacy laws, with copyright laws. All of those things can affect a public art project. It's not the same as gallery work because, again, people are buying what you're creating. But this public art project is going out into the exterior, is going outside. And again, you have to follow all of the laws of the land. We're doing something new this year. We are moving to submittable. And so all applications must be submitted online by 9 p.m. Guess the tip. I always suggest you try to get your application in a week before, a couple of days before, because when 5:30 or when most staff members leave for the day. So if you have questions after 5:30, you're not going to be able to get them answered. So if you try to get that application in earlier, it gives you time to address any issues. Same as with Jungle Lasers, a confirmation email is going to generate with the submission of your application. Technical issues, you're going to contact the grant portal help desk or a help feature. Failure to receive a confirmation email, immediately send an email to CAH staff. And again, incomplete or late applications or applications that don't follow the instruction and guidelines are deemed ineligible for review and funding. Last of the tips, there are narrative questions that I've been mentioning throughout. Do yourself a favor, grab the questions from the individual or the organizational questions and write them in words so you can go back and edit them at will and pay attention to the word limits. Again, test the functionality of work samples, select recent high quality samples that relate directly to the project. And also don't take photographs with your iPhone because often the panel cannot open those images. We want JPEGs. So make sure you're using JPEGs. And make sure your work and your narrative are discussing the skills of the artists involved in the creation of the work. Again, application checklist, make sure you meet all the eligibility requirements, complete all required questions in the online application, upload the mandatory documents, and all the forms can be found on our webpage. Tools that can assist you. Again, read the RFA, make sure this is what you need for your project. Complete all required questions in the online application. Use that mandatory document list that's created so you can just check off as you go through. You can call and get an appointment for 30 minutes of staff time up to 1 week before the application is due. Again, do that. That's what I'm here for. That's what staff is here for. If I don't know something, I ask other folks who are experts on this. So use that time, again, up to 1 week before the application is due. And we also offer live chats and have a final question review. Those dates will be in the RFA. Here are some public art resources: Forecast, American for the Arts, the Public Art Archive. There are two CAH Business of the Arts, past Business of the Art workshops that will give you a lot of information. They also name, and you'll have people from different organizations that, again, if you're looking for partners, this might be a good place to kind of see if there are partners that can work for you. There's also the Public Arts Work Plan of 2026. There are many articles and videos to show you how to take photographs of your work. I just selected two, but if you don't like these two, find others, but you want to make sure you have steps to how to photograph your work. You want to make sure you're putting your work in its best light. If you have any questions, my name's Carrie Kennedy. You can reach me at 202-577-2771. Again, all of this information is on the website, and I really appreciate those of you that have lasted the whole time, and we can turn it back over to Dwayne and questions.
Yes, thank you very much, Carrie, for this presentation. We actually have a few questions. I also want to point people to the chat. There's been some great information shared, some potential partners, and some insight from folks that have received grants in the past. So definitely take a moment to, to check out the chat and take some note. So, first question that came in. Is it required that everyone on the team be a DC resident? So let's say you are an artist that is working with an organization. Does everybody on your team have to be a DC resident, or is it like, you know, what are those requirements?
No, the person that applies for the application has to be DC resident. Their team can be from anywhere. The panel does see where folks are from, but that will not, we've had plenty of applications that had artists, even artists, organizations have picked artists that were not DC residents and have been awarded. So everybody on the team does not, the person applying for the grant does.
So in theory, an organization that is applying, if the organization is founded in DC, but the managing staff person lives in Maryland, but the organization is founded in DC, that still
That's
fits?
fine. Yeah,
Okay.
that fits. Folks work where they do and they live where they can. So they'd be fine.
Got you. I wanted to make sure that we got the nuance that might be present in that
Absolutely.
question as well.
Absolutely.
Going over to two questions that were in the chat. For the Fourth Street underpass submission, did they have the artists already design the murals prior to receiving the funding, or how did they approach that?
So the images I showed you were actually from the application proposal. So that's why I was saying you really this is the way a proposal sh that is going to rank well looks. They had the individual work from the artists with their actual mural in scale. And again, in scale, they knew they were going to have, I believe those murals are 20 by 8. And so again, proportionally, the drawings, the original drawings from the artists were to scale. And then they placed the different works in the site. And so, yes, that proposal was prepared. Almost every image I showed of that project was in the proposal, other than the ones that actually were on the wall.
Indeed. A follow-up question. How did Foon Sham slash Apple Bite and Pineapple incorporate the community component into their application?
That's a good question. I'd have to go. Those are older projects, but the newer project, the Rain Gardens, he was working with Golden Triangle Bid, and they did that type of work. They did the community outreach. They work a little differently than some of the other, they kind of curate their community. And so they work with business owners. So they're the ones that are collecting the data and finding out what folks need or want in their community. So again, that's why some artists partner, because again, they don't necessarily want to do that part of the project, but it has to be done. So they partner with somebody that can do that or has that kind of information on hand.
Moving back into the Q&A box, how do we find out about technical options like the fabric installations you show, the mythic being of, etc.?
Would you say that again?
So, this person is interested in learning more about technical options. So instead of like directly spraying or placing your art onto the wall, how do folks learn about the options like the fabric installation, vinyl prints, things of that nature?
You can reach out directly to the people that have a project that you're interested in, or you can do your own research. You can find like digital media companies, tell them what you're thinking about, tell them what your needs are. If you look, and the way you can do that, you find a project you like, go online, figure out who commissioned it. Sometimes on some different public art resources, they list the company they worked with. Again, you can make a phone call to the agency that got the award and ask them. How successful that is depends on how open the agency is. But public art, again, it's research, and you reach out to artists that have done projects, and you can just ask them directly. It really is, like I said, it's a research project too. And we do the same thing here. Like we don't always know. Um, for those of you that knew Rom Hubbardson, he was our cur conservation liaison, and I work with him quite a bit when the applications come in. If there's a material that I'm not familiar with, or it's being used in a way that I'm not familiar with, and he would reach out to say, "Oh, this will work. This won't work. We've never heard of this." So again, you just want to make sure you're doing that. You could work with a conservationist. So you have to decide in your budget too how much room you have, because if you have to pay somebody to kind of review your work because you're using experimental materials, consider that in the budget. And
Very,
and you'll take that on yourself because again, you will not have been awarded the grant yet.
very fitting that you mentioned budget because the follow-up question on that was, would a consulting architect fee be included in the 20% artist fee maximum?
No, the artist fee and it's maximum. So a lot of times artists get into a project and realize later they need different arts professionals, be it an architect, be it a fabrication person or something, and they don't have any more money. Like they budgeted everything out. That's why we say up to 20% because the artist may decide, you know what, I'm going to take 5% of this and pay somebody else. So to answer the question, no, the architect's fee would not necessarily have to come out of the artist fee. It just depends on if you budget it at the beginning or if you realize at the end, oh, I don't have any more money to move around. The only pot of money I've got is my artist fee. You may decide you need that consultant to, you know, and you need to pay him out of your commission. And that's across the board. That's just not that's not us saying. It's not me saying that. I've seen that consistently over different public art ecosystems across the country. That just it's just what happens. Because again, public art is like a moving animal, and you're just trying to make sure everything, you know, works out in the end.
All right. Another question from the chat. Can you comment on the required DUNS number? This person got hung up on that in the last year.
You know, every year, we try to decide if that's still necessary. So it will be in the RFA. If you want to drop me an email, I can follow up with our folks on our side to see if that's actually going to be required this year. Um, Otherwise, you just have to go on the website, the Dubs, the DUNS number site, and get started. And I think what happens with people is they wait too late because it can take several weeks. And when I say several, I mean more like 4, 6 weeks. Um, and also with the shutdown situations, anything that can affect anything federal, you just want to start earlier to get that. So I would get that process started. But again, drop me an email if you're more specific, and I will be able to find out again if that's going to be required this year.
And again, your email is kerry.kennedy.dc.gov. That's
Yep.
kerry.kennedy.gov. Um, I see that someone else, up there we go. Did the 4th Street mural person pay those muralists before submitting the art to the application, or did they offer the art as part of the opportunity?
No, I do believe they paid them, um, but they hadn't done the work. So the proposal was created. And I believe they made you know, it was based on contingents and them getting the grant. So they paid them once they did the work after they had been awarded the grant. Again, the proposal was just doing that initial drawing. And I guess they did a call to artists. They probably gave them a fee, you know, something that they could afford in their budget. And that's a good point. If you're an organization and you want to do a large scale public art project, best practice is to pay artists for their work, estimate how long it's going to take them to give you a model or a drawing, and pay them accordingly. And for artists, if an organization, it's a good barometer for what the relationship is going to be, if they value paying the artist. So I would recommend you find a partner and kind of have those conversations right at the onset. Now, it's a little
Indeed.
different if you're the individual artist and you're proposing the project. Um, but if the organization is doing a call to artists, then there should probably be a fee. It may not
Indeed.
be the entire fee that you'll get once you do the work. They may divide that up.
All
Does that
right.
make sense?
It makes sense to me. And I
Okay.
imagine I'm looking in the chat to see if that artist has responded. Yes. Yes, yes, and thank you.
Okay.
With that, thank you very much for your time. Carrie, thank you for this incredible presentation. Um, Everyone that is still here and present, thank you for being present. There will be a survey that goes out. This session is also being recorded, and so it will be available so that you can revisit it and follow up on any of the questions that you may have had. We also have, we have a few different things that are coming up, including our commission meeting on Monday. I believe it has moved to be virtual in keeping the weather in mind. We also are having our next Business of the Arts session, which will be February 24th, and it'll be tax considerations for artists. So could be something of interest to those that are in attendance. Thank you very much for your time. We look forward to serving you in the future. Take care. Be well. Good night.
Good night.